Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's MSCI Safety webinar. I'm Brianna D. with MSCI, and before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. On today's webinar, you will be muted throughout the entire time, but you do have the opportunity to ask questions. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A box that you could pop open, and go ahead and type those questions when you think of them, and we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of today's webinar. You were emailed a copy of today's slides and additional resources, but those are also available in the chat right now. Tyler just dropped them in for us. Thank you very much, Tyler. Go ahead and follow along if you'd like, or use them to share with your colleagues after today's webinar. A recording of the webinar will also be emailed to you after today's webinar, but if you ever miss an MSCI webinar or any MSCI safety webinars, go ahead to www.msci.org and look under resources. We have a webinar library that has all the recordings of past webinars, and all the future recordings will be there as well. Following today's webinar, you also will receive a survey. It's a very brief survey. Please take a moment to answer the few questions that we have. It helps us develop future safety webinars. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Steve Yates, CEO and founder of Optimum Safety Management. Steve has a mechanical engineering background with vast experience in both manufacturing operations and construction technology. He is recognized for the development and implementation of effective safety management systems within many local, regional, and national firms. He is also a former OSHA outreach trainer. As a certified leadership coach, Steve is passionate about developing leaders within his clients' organizations who will value and empower others to realize Optimum's vision: workers everywhere, valued and safe. Thank you again for joining us, Steve, and we look forward to your webinar, and I'll see you at the end with questions.
Absolutely, Brianna. Thanks very much. Always appreciate the opportunity to present to the membership at MSCI. We love our membership with the group and really value the relationship with the members and the impact that we can all have together as it relates to reducing injury and improving conditions around what is a great industry. So thanks again. Really appreciate your support. Thanks, Brianna.
Thank you, Steve.
Absolutely. Hey, I'm gonna dive right in. I've got a question for you. Have you ever heard any of these statements before? Right? Safety is a necessary evil. All safety does is cost money. You can't produce both safely and efficiently. It's going to slow us down too much, right? What's the benefit to spending all this money? I think if you've been in and around any manufacturing industry for any length of time, especially with any safety responsibility or any production responsibility where you're trying to drive improvement and continuous improvement efforts across a productivity chain or a manufacturing chain, you are always hearing these things. However, the question is, we want to ask, what are they really saying? What are people really trying to communicate when they come across with these statements? Really important. And I think it's really important for us as the attendees in today's webinar. There could be a good cross section of people. So I just want to talk a little bit about who might be on the call today. We might have production supervisors on the call. We might have directors. The director level may be director of operations, manager of operations, director of safety, those types of things. We could even have, depending on the size of the company, some presidents or founders, CEOs of privately held companies. There's a lot of different spectrum on the call today. We may even have some frontline workers. If you're watching this webinar as part of your safety committee, maybe you're all gathered in a conference room and watching this today. There's really something here for all of us. And what I mean by that is that if you're one who owns or operates the business, or you're at a high-level executive role or an upper management role, you really need to understand these things, because I think it can give you a different perspective on the way you look at motivators towards spending or investing. Really, we want to invest resources in our productivity measures or in our production environments to drive safety improvements. When it comes to that supervisor, though, you're kind of caught in that middle between that upper management and that frontline worker. And I think it can really free you up and help you to do your job even better if you understand the language that people are speaking on both sides of the equation, but also how you can influence it. So, and then that frontline worker, again, just understanding the impact that you can have on safety by influencing your coworker toward building and developing culture where you're watching out for each other and really reducing injuries and exposures across the workplace. So when we hear people talk about, talk like I just laid out some of those statements, the question is, who do you report to, right? Are you reporting direct to a business owner? Are you reporting to a president or someone in the officers layer of the organization? Are you reporting to an operations person, maybe your plant manager, or even to your direct supervisor? The question really becomes, what world do they live in versus the world that we live in? Because we all have different perspectives. And that's really what we want to learn about today is understanding the perspective of the people that we're trying to win over to a different way of thinking. We're all trying to move different initiatives, and we want to understand the perspectives that each of us might be running in, each of the different circles that we run in, our sphere of influence. And then the question is, who do they report to? So when you're thinking about your executives, if you're in a publicly traded company, they're reporting to a board of directors and ultimately to a set of shareholders, people who are investing their hard-earned dollars to buy shares of your company so that they can get a return on their investment. Very important to understand that if you're in a privately held company, like many of the MSCI members are, you're reporting to a local stakeholder, maybe a family, a founding family who has owned that business since it founded it. Maybe you're in second or third generation ownership. Maybe it's still first generation or beyond. We don't know, right? But we want to think about the language that that person that you're reporting to or asking to gain buy-in from an initiative, what language are they speaking? So we think about production, right? How many units, how many tons, how many pieces, whatever it might be that we're pushing out the door as our production measures. Are they thinking in terms of profits, bottom line profits to the organization? We're going to give you some things to think about when it comes to profits here in a little while. Here's another one that's very relevant today. And I know MSCI and the staff are doing a lot of work around the topic of ESG. And we want you to understand what that means, because even within an organization that is privately held, these ESG initiatives for the publicly traded companies are starting to have an impact in the private ones, because what the privately held companies are realizing is that if ESG initiatives drive change positively in publicly traded companies, why wouldn't we participate in some of those same things? So what is ESG? It's environmental, social, and governance. So we think about environment, that's pretty straightforward, but that can actually result in not only our waste streams and our water runoff and those kind of things that are environmentally controlled by the EPA and your local state-owned or the state-run Environmental Protection Agency branches, but also things like your carbon footprint. And reducing carbon footprint for a manufacturing firm is a big deal, because as we reduce carbon footprint, it has an impact on energy credits and some of the other things from the government, but as well, it can impact the bottom line profits of the organization. Typically, when we impact the environmental footprint, carbon footprint of a company, there's energy savings there as well that are direct to the bottom line after repaying a return on investment. And that's another term we're going to take a look at here in more detail today. Social, the S for ESG. How well are we treating our employees? How well are we building culture? And there's no better place to build culture than beginning with safety within an organization. It has ripple effects throughout the whole organization, but we know that our millennials and those that are coming into the organization today are much more socially aware. They want to make sure that they're working for an organization that treats its people well, has a good, clean working environment, and kind of business as usual, the way we've done it in this industry, is not going to fly moving into the future. Governance, things like DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, those are very important. They're being driven by ESG initiatives for publicly traded companies at the board level, but also all the way through the organization. And they're very important and very relevant to our work environment today. So they can become big motivators and tools that we can use to really help drive initiatives within the operating environment. So all of that build up said, let's get into the topic, right? So effective communication requires that people use the same language or use an interpreter. So I have I don't know if it's a gift or a curse, but the ability to sit in a room and listen to two different parties talk and catch when they're actually talking about two different topics and they're not really communicating well. And I see it in almost every meeting that I sit in. I see it in a lot of different communications across our team here at Optimum, but also across the industry and in different environments where I get people often miss each other. I saw it very up close and personal years ago. Took a mission trip to Moscow, and I don't speak any Russian at all. And we needed an interpreter at our side the entire trip because there was no way that we were going to communicate well. That person became a very essential part of everyday life and communication there while we were there for about a 2-week period. But we really need to understand the languages that we speak as safety professionals or as supervisors or operations managers when we're trying to speak with our upper management team and getting buy-in around these initiatives. Now, one of the main reasons that we did this webinar, that we're putting this content together, is because it came as a request through your safety advisory committee for MSCI. This is a known issue across every industry, but definitely within metals, and we wanted to make sure that you had an understanding of this. So when we think about it from a safety professional standpoint, many of us are very tactical and we're rooted and grounded in compliance. Same can happen for HR. We get rooted and grounded in the compliance, and we start speaking in code, specifically the code in the language of the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations. Here in the US, there's Canadian code, down in Mexico, same, all the different countries that we're operating in here across MSCI. And we start to come at our upper management with these different codes saying, we need to comply, you need to comply. I even heard about one guy went to an OSHA 10-hour class. He came back to the plant and he told his plant manager, you're not going to look good in orange. We need to do these things. And, you know, he was kind of threatening the manager with compliance with the OSHA standards as the reason to make changes within the workplace. I can tell you that that didn't go well for that person. They never sent him to another safety class outside the organization because they didn't want to create the problem, right? So we want to make sure that we don't come back and start talking about things that aren't relevant. It's kind of like for our management team, it's eating a bowl of dry granola, right? It's like, that's not good to chew on. Need a little bit of milk, honey, sugar with that to make it palatable, make it understandable and digestible. So a little bit more on that as we go. You know, we start talking about reductions in illness, injury, and fatality rates, and these can be very effective, again, depending on the audience. Now, you know, ethics or morality, we'd like to think that every management team member is going to be motivated by just doing the right thing. But the unfortunate thing is, because of the language that their stakeholders are speaking to them about, they don't often hear, or sometimes don't hear, those messages. Again, it'd be nice to think that they would, and we could just motivate them based on doing the right thing, but they don't often work very well. Each and every one of those viewpoints is extremely important. It just doesn't mean that they're always going to get heard, right? So remember, in order to communicate effectively, we need that translator. Now, the translator in the context of what we're talking about here comes by way, again, of Peter Drucker. So Peter Drucker, he's the founder of modern management technique and thought and guiding principles. And what he discussed is the first duty of business is to survive. When you think about your CEOs, your CFOs, your executive VP of ops, all of your management team, their first driving order is to get the business to survive into the future. They're looking at trends and where the market is heading and making sure they're moving the business in line with the market trends and so on. But the guiding principle, economics, is not necessarily the maximization of profit. Believe it or not, that's fairly easy for a business to maximize the profits on its product, as long as they don't get caught in commodity traps, but they can maximize the profit. Here's the big deal though, it's the avoidance of loss. As we're operating the business over and over, day in, day out, how do we maximize avoiding losses within the business? And that's really where a lot of what we do comes in as safety professionals and operations professionals. So you've all heard it said, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, right? So we don't want to continue communicating the same way, thinking we're going to get a different result, right? What happens then is we become irrelevant. The message that we're trying to deliver over and over again, bounced off of a dark blank wall, hard wall, means that we're becoming irrelevant. And the leadership that we're trying to communicate with is not going to hear us. So we need to begin taking advantage of that translation, that translator. Okay. So how do we do that? Couple things to keep in mind. The way the human brain functions is that when we get into a fight or flight situation, like trying to fend off somebody that's attacking us or fending off a significant threat to our business or to the production environment, we can get into what's called fight or flight mentality. Literally what happens is the brain floods your frontal cortex. You get about 5% of your brain capacity, all focused on defense and fighting for your life, literally. That fight or flight shock mentality. What happens when we do that is we shut down the other 95%. Let me back up there. Going the wrong direction here. Pardon me. Let me get back to the slide I need to be on. I backed up a lot. Wow. Here we go. So what we need to remember is that when we flood that frontal cortex, we end up losing the other 95% of our thinking, which is where all of our creative thinking is done. It's all of our problem solving. It's the area that we need when we are trying to build solutions to improve safety and methodologies in our plant, but it's also the space that we need our leadership in when we go to present a solution that we're looking for their buy-in. So if we catch them like on an afternoon when they've just come out of a board meeting, or maybe they're going into a board meeting and they're trying to prepare for that board meeting, and we walk through the front door and we say, boss, I got a great solution. I want you to listen to this. We want to do this new solution, etc. Here's what you get. They pick their head up from their desk and they look at you like, who are you? Why are you in my door? What is this? I'm focused on what I'm doing, right? And you will never get their buy-in, because what they're doing right now is they're working in their top left box. Top left box. It's urgent and it's important that they get that done immediately so they can get into the board meeting and have all their facts and figures ready. So what are these boxes we're looking at? So this is Stephen Covey's time management quadrants. These are time tested and proven. You can look for Covey's quadrants within your Google search engine. You'll find all kinds of information on them. I want to present this to you because some of you, if you're like me, you read this years ago, 7 Habits of a Highly Effective Person. Stephen Covey published it then. But the problem is we've forgotten it and we're not applying it today. So when we look at it, we have 2 columns, urgent and not urgent. We have 2 rows, important and not important. So let's take a look at that bottom right box. Wordle, checking your Facebook account, making dinner plans, right? They're not urgent, They're not important necessarily to your work. The one to the left of it, junk mail, telemarketers, email notifications, all that stuff that bings on your phone or pops up on your screen all day long, those are not important distractions that take you out of the important box. So what do we want you to know about that? Stay out of those two boxes, right? Things like playing Candy Crush, right? That's not urgent, and it's totally not important, so stay away from that stuff. Where we spend most of our day, though, is in the urgent important. It's the new order that just came in. It's the new quote that just came in. It's the new saw blade that broke that we've got to go and figure out how to get that thing taken care of. We have to spend time in those boxes, right? Don't ignore those things. But what we want to make sure that we do is we plan time for things in our important, not urgent box. Those are things that are not screaming for your time. They're things like your safety management systems. Safety is viewed as important but not urgent in many organizations. That's because the event has not happened yet. But here's what happens, right? Until suddenly we have a major accident, or OSHA knocks on the door, Canadian government knocks on your door. Now you're into a compliance inspection, and all of a sudden safety moves over into urgent and important. It slides right over and takes all of your time. We want to make sure we're spending time in that not urgent and important box regularly to work. Here's the way we put it as business owners and entrepreneurs: to work on our business, not always in it. So day to day, we're working in that urgent, important. We want to work in the not urgent but important box as much as we can to prevent some of the problem. Remember that translator, right? Avoidance of loss. So what we want to talk about now, I want to take you through a couple of avoidance of loss concepts. And remember, today's webinar, what we're talking about here today is conceptual, right? It's concepts, it's principles to apply. This is not a webinar on, go do these things, these 6 things. This is how to do some things that can help you really have a better and more successful result with where you're spending your time. So when we talk about avoidance of loss, one of the things that we can look at is compliance, right? OSHA versus your work comp, your insurance carrier. The question is, who has the heavier hand, right? Well, OSHA, several years ago, underneath the Bush administration, George W. Bush, they allowed OSHA to tie the cost of living index to their maximum penalties. And each year we've been seeing these increase, and I want you to know right now, about $14,500 is the max penalty on a serious citation. It can go times 10 for repeats, but it will continue to rise and go up over time. It's become fairly significant. These are significant dollars for a lot of organizations, and they can be a motivator to do things within your work environment. Now, your insurance carrier, some of you have heard this term, your experience modification rate, or EMR. We're going to talk more about that later. But what I do want to let you know is that OSHA is getting heavier in their enforcement environment, and they're starting to staff up for some of that. So we're going to talk about that here next. Here's what I need you to know, though. If you're going to use fines and penalties, make them industry specific and relevant to your industry. So your CEO within a metals plant doesn't care that the excavator across town just got fined. Believe me, there is plenty of examples within your industry of where people have been fined for OSHA violations. You're seeing some different things come across the screen now that are press releases. Now, OSHA has not only increased their penalties, but they've also put out reporting requirements where their local offices will report to the media high volume or high impact citations. And you don't want to be publicized as one of those. There's a bill that's out now for passage that would actually reduce that level. So there'll be much more flow to the media, the local media as well, on citation and penalties. You also need to know that the local regional offices are hiring here in 22. So for the last several years under COVID, a lot of the OSHA area offices have been almost reclusive. They've been drawing back into their offices to avoid the exposures. And we're now seeing them hiring and starting to staff up for an enhanced compliance regimen and inspection routine. So if you've not seen OSHA in a while, don't think that they've gone away. They're ramping up, and they will be out to sea at some point. So we want to talk about workers' compensation insurance because it's one of the often misunderstood or not understood at all across your supervisor tiers, your management. I've even spoken to CFOs at companies with 600 employees that didn't understand what their EMR was, yet every year they're spending well in excess of $1 million on workers' compensation insurance coverage. So your EMR, it's kind of like your credit rating for insurance. It's based on how many people you're injuring compared to the rest of your industry. And it's calculated on a 3-year window with a year of lag. I'm going to show you an example on the next slide. But the significant number here is 1.0. So if you're injuring the same number of people as the rest of your industry, you will have a 1.0. Same number, same severity. You'll be a 1.0, which means you're average. Not better than average, just average. And I know a lot of us, that's, we've got a competitive streak. We want to be better than average. Better than average is below 1.0. So something like a 0.8 to 0.7, those are better than average. If you're injuring more or more severe, your number is going to be high. And for small organizations, it's easy to get EMRs that are over 1 because you don't have the large volume of payroll dollars to absorb those injuries in. So a bubble in the graph, we want to talk about that. I'll show you here on the next chart. You can have a bubble in your graph where you've had a high year, and it can actually last for up to a 3 or 4 year period. So preventative safety measures are very important to keep your EMR under control. You can also gain a competitive advantage here. If your EMR is below 1, you're going to save money on your workers' compensation insurance premium. It's a big cost for your company. You can actually put that back into trying to underbid, sell your product a little bit lower than Joe's Steel right across town and gain some work. But if you're over 1, it can also prevent some contracts from being granted. Some employers want to know that your EMR is a 1.0 or below, especially if you're in like the structural steel game and you're doing the install as well. A lot of general contractors don't want you on their job sites if your EMR is over 1. So I know that pertains to a lot of different companies, including the plant I was just in yesterday here within the industry. What that means when we're looking at this chart, we have a high year of losses in 1 year, a low year in the next, a high year here in the next year. A couple of high years means that our EMR is going to be higher. And here you can see a calculation. We just had a live example with an employer at a 1.496. It's going to take a while for that second high year to work its way out of the graph. You see it's here, it won't be here in the following year, but what are you doing in these subsequent years? That really matters to keep driving. The best thing is 3 low years in your calculation, getting that EMR down nice and tight. Now, some of you are thinking, hey, this is getting a little technical, and like, how does this really relate to me? If you're not driving the injuries out of your workplace, you're directly impacting these numbers, and they impact your bottom line. So the dollar rate times your annual payroll times this EMR gets you the premium that you're going to pay for that insurance. So if you have your rate, this is a current average rate for labor in the metals industry, 3.5 cents per hour work, per $100 of payroll. So if you have per dollar of payroll. So if you have about 5.8 million in payroll, that's about 100 workers in a warehouse. That's about what your payroll is going to be. really guesstimating some of this. It can vary depending on a lot of factors. If your EMR is 1.49, you're going to pay about 300,000 in work comp premium. However, if your EMR is down at 1.0, you can see we're saving about $100,000 to the bottom line of the organization. That's a big deal. All right. If you're at a 0.67 where you're 33% less than the industry average, the difference in that spread is about 160,000, right? A lot of money. And putting that to the bottom line of your organization, you can now afford to do some additional training, guarding, all different types of initiatives. Or if you've done those, and this is the result, this is how now we're getting a return on that investment. It is a real deal. I mean, this is just a letter we received from a broker where we saved their client about 125,000 in reduced premium and general liability premiums. It can make a big difference to a company. Here's a loss model that you might want to take note of. Again, these are all in your notes, so you can use this later. The question to ask is that 150,000 in savings, how many tons of steel, how many pounds, how many bars, how many pieces, whatever your unit of production is, how many would we have to produce to make up for that loss? And suddenly we're putting it into numbers now that are relatable to the person right on the line. If I tell you, well, I'll show you an example here on the next slide. For time, I'm not going to go through this. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can run through these formulas. We're trying to teach you a little bit about how to look at a profit and loss statement for your organization so that you can be educated enough to run a quick example like this. It's pretty straightforward. If you have a $42,000 incident cost and you have a $100 per unit sales price, you don't get to make 4,200 units to get that $100 back per unit to pay for that cost. You're only getting the profit back to apply because you have to pay for all the costs of goods sold, the material, the labor, all that. So at a $5 per unit net profit goal, which is about realistic, 5%, some organizations higher or lower, you need to produce 8,400 units to put that $42,000 back into your organization. So when you start to think about that in work effort of days, suddenly your production people will begin to understand in production hours how much it takes to repay that injury. And I'll tell you, this is really like big light bulb moments to get your production staff bought in. We're talking about management buy-in. This can be a production buy-in as well, okay? When we start talking about more severe injuries like fatalities, that can put a $1.2 million loss on your workers' comp premium. Not to mention the loss of life and all that. All of that is absolutely paramount to everything that we're talking about. We don't want people to get hurt in the workplace, but I'm trying to give you some translators here to make it real to the people, because a lot of times when we say, well, we're going to spend that $120,000 to fix that problem, people go, that's a lot of money. And then you go, well, yeah, we don't want anyone to get hurt or lose their life. And they think that's going to happen down the street. That's never going to happen here. But if we can start to put it into dollar costs where they can begin to really internalize those costs, suddenly it becomes real to them and they will move forward and actually find the motivation to begin to do these things. So very important. And I know there's some folks on the line that are practicing these things in their organization, and they could give testimony to the fact that what I'm saying, these can be big motivators. So a lot of different factors here in a loss model. Here's another thing. There's a lot of articles, if you start researching the ties between quality and safety, what you will find is any organization that has an increase in safety also has an increase in quality. When you drive quality initiatives to produce cleaner, better, safer, you will also have productivity increases. And anytime you can do more with less, you have a bottom line profitability increase. So your upper management, your C-suite, your CFO, when you start talking in this kind of a language, you will get their ear and they will begin to listen and they'll love working with you, right? Now it's really difficult though at times to measure things that don't happen. So we've got to get creative and we've got to talk about how to create measures for these loss avoidance models. So we've got to find like hard metrics or milestones. And I'm going to present some to you here quickly. And there's a lot of work been done on this out in the industry. Some of your organizations are already tracking this, but I want to give you two different mindsets to look at here. One is lagging indicators. These are things that we've been looking at for years, right? As production experts and as safety experts and HR experts, we look at things like injury costs, medical costs, EMR, work comp costs. All these things are very, very relevant to the business, but they're all what we would call lagging indicators. I showed you on the EMR, that's a 3+1 year old lagging indicator. It's 4 years before we can really see the impact we're having there, unless your organization is self-insured or on a large loss insurance policy. A lot of you, your organizations take maybe the first $250,000 of a loss before your overinsurance kicks in. So in your organization, your work comp is a right here, right now kind of a loss. But we want to look at leading indicators. So building things like safety scorecards that have weekly, monthly, quarterly measures on leading indicators like near miss reporting, first aid reporting. You might say, well, first aid, somebody got injured, but they got injured in a very minor way. It wasn't a limb or a loss of life or a lost time injury, something that was very significant. If we can capture first aid reporting, we can actually use it as a leading indicator. Observations are great tools. Measure those, both behavioral and conditions. So looking at behaviors in a facility as well as conditions. Daily equipment inspections. So I'm not only talking here about things like forklifts, but your saws, your guarding, the condition of the belts, those types of things. Within the metals industry, there are hundreds of thousands of saws that create injury potential and exposure every minute of every day. And if we can get good at doing some preventative inspection on those, predictive inspections, we can actually begin to root out a lot of injury. So look at your metrics, start tracking them, and remember that management will always, most always support monetary savings. The trick is to remember we need to prove that monetary savings in a way that management can actually understand and digest. So it's back to that translator. It's that avoidance of loss, right? So things that cannot be recovered, some things to think about, right? Loss of life, limb function, company image as well. This is a really big deal. You know, when we start talking about that OSHA publishing those findings and those fines, they're just alleged fines when OSHA issues them. They don't wait for you to be finally convicted and it's on your record before they put out that press release. They will put it out within months of the inspector walking out of your facility, not giving you any opportunity to fix it. They're pretty rough about that. So insurance increases, obviously, we've talked about significant financial losses. Now, I want to talk about two different categories here, right? We just talked about leading and lagging indicators. I want to talk with you for a minute about direct and indirect costs, because there's things that you need to understand. When somebody gets injured, it's not just the medical cost. So a lot of times, if you've seen things on injury costs, you see it portrayed as an iceberg. So what sank the Titanic was not the little bit of ice that was above the waterline that they could see. It was all that ice that was below it, kind of like what you're seeing here, the below the waterline effect. So when we look at injuries within a workplace, The direct costs are all the medical costs, typically paid directly through your work comp insurance, or again, through a self-insured plan directly from your employer. Your indirect costs, these can be things like wages due to lost time, overtime costs, administrative costs, costs to move production from your facility to another one, because when that injury occurred, it also damaged your slitting line and took it out of service. And now you can't run that slitting line, that $2 million line that's there that you just put in, until it gets repaired, and you have to move all of your coil processing to another facility. That's a big expense, and that blows up your indirect costs. Plus, always remember that every injury, every incident has a downstream effect on your work comp insurance, but also your CGL, or commercial general liability insurance policy, for products and completed operations, liquidated damages. There's all kinds of other costs that come into play with every injury. You know, by now, by the time you're done with this, it's like, oh my word, we ought to stop every injury, every incident in our plant because they have huge impacts. Yes, you're right. They have huge impacts. So those plants that are not like high on their radar screen, safety issues and maintenance and reliability concerns, and really think about predictive and preventative maintenance at a very high level. These costs, the losses you can avoid, need to play a very significant part in that, you know, urgent and important box, overcoming some of the other things that are in the day-to-day for you. Hopefully I'm helping to raise the awareness of some of that for you today. I want to talk with you about just the average costs. So average cost of an injury now, according to the National Safety Council, $42,000. This goes anywhere from, you know, the minor cut that's recordable because of stitches, all the way up to multiple back surgeries, time off, or God forbid, that fatal workplace injury. When we start to look at the indirect costs, these can be 2 to 4 or 5 times, depending on which study you look at and which one you want to kind of go after, or what industry you're within. We like to stay conservative on this because otherwise the numbers get unbelievable in their size, but they are big. So we use a Liberty Mutual Research Institute study that shows 2 times to keep it conservative. So 42,000 plus that 84, total estimated cost of an injury, 126,000. So industry average around the metals industry for the last several years, it's been fluctuating up and down right about 5 per 100. So if you have a workplace with 100 people in it, you're having about 5 injuries every year. You're spending about $630,000 a year on injuries. Now, the problem is your organization won't be tracking a lot of those indirect costs, so it's really difficult to prove that out. Your CFO might think, you know, chief financial officer, he goes, I don't think that's true. Well, it's true when you start tracking all the numbers, but most of our organizations are not. We're not sophisticated enough to be looking at all those different captures, and we end up just losing them in kind of cost of doing business categories in our general and administrative expenses, some companies within their cost of goods. So I want to give you another way to show this. We looked at an organization recently that had 210 employees. They had 22 recordable injuries. So what we did was we built an infographic for them. Here's 210 employees in gray, 33 of them are yellow. That shows your total recordables. 17 of the 22 were DART, meaning they had days away, restricted, or transferred. So this is pretty significant. They had a high severity in their frequency. So 22 being the frequency, 17 is the severity. And now when you look at the most severe, that's your lost time incident rate. That's these red X's mean that these people were not able to come back to work the next day. They lost them for at least one day. up to maybe over 180 days, which is where OSHA stops counting. But at that point, they've been out of work for a long time, maybe surgery, recovery, multiple surgeries, whatever it is. This is a way to graph out quickly for your employer what it means to have this kind of a loss. Now, let's say you don't know what those losses are, or you're looking at the next year and you say to your employer, hey, we got 210 employees. Let's say we have an industry average rate of 5.0, and you want to run an example for your C-suite. So 210, that's 2 times 100 roughly. That means you have 5 average times 2 is 10. So you give your CEO, Jim, for lack of a better name, right? Let's say Jim's your CEO. You say, Jim, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take these bullseye targets. I want you to walk across the line of 210 employees and put these on the back of the 10 employees that you would like to have as assigned these injuries to this year. And I think at that point, your CEO will go, uh-oh, we got a problem. If we're doing this, we need to change this, right? Find a way to make it real and get underneath the emotion to drive some sort of an emotional response within your management team. And suddenly you're showing them the data in their language, and now you have a translator. Now I've got a few slides to show you here that I want to show you some useful formulas. This gets a little thick, so I'm going to cover it a little quickly. And you've got all these formulas within your slide handouts. If you want to have any conversation on this, feel free, give us a call at the safety helpline or ask in the questions. I'm trying to get to Q&A so we have a few minutes for your questions. So useful formulas, right? So your average recordable injuries per year times that average cost per injury gives you your annual average total cost incurred, okay? So your average total cost incurred times a percentage reduction. Let's say you want to do something like a big training initiative, education program, and you think that's going to reduce your injuries by 20%. Well, you can now take your annual cost times 20%. You can show your potential savings. And now that potential savings in year 1 plus projected out 3 years, years 2 and 3, now you have a potential cumulative savings. So why is it important to know your potential cumulative savings? Well, all of our management teams think in the constraint of ROI, or return on investment. So if we have that potential 1-year savings minus our initial investment, we can calculate what that return is, right? For every dollar spent, how many dollars am I getting back? And I'm going to show you an example now with some real numbers. Don't worry about catching all this right now, but you've got it in the notes. Think about it. Let's talk about it. We can run some examples for your organization and help you with this. So if you have an average recordable injuries of 11 per year, you've got 100. There's a note here. It says use your 3-year average. Look back over 3 years and take the average of your number of injuries, right? If you had a high number last year, don't try to overinflate the example just using 1 year. You might have had COVID cases or something that drew it to one side or another. Average things out. Use realistic examples. Your average cost of a recordable injury off of our study, that's that 126 number. Now the average total cost incurred will be 11 times the 126. That gives you about $1.4 million. Okay, that's the total number you're working with that you're going to spend next year on all of your injuries, all things being equal and running average. Now show them how that translates into actual savings. So if you have a 35% reduction in injury, you might get a $485,000 savings, all the way up to 55%. These are numbers that we use here at Optimum when we're talking with people, because we find that most of the initiatives we put in, if they're thorough and well thought out and have an adequate investment, can have between this 35 really conservative, 55 on the high end. We've had them as high as 76% in a year. Depends on the condition of the company and how well we can do on getting the losses down. But these are some real examples, right? So your projected ROI is really important to look at. So with a $250,000 investment, some of you may not be able to make that kind of an investment. You might be looking at a smaller initiative. Some of you are looking at much larger. Okay, there's all kinds of examples. I'm just using this for the example for today. That initial investment now, when you think about next year at a 35, 45, 55% savings, you have to pay back that initial investment. You have to recover it. And then whatever's left over in the savings, that is your potential ROI. Now, here's something you need to know about. It's called a hurdle rate. Most of your CFOs, when they're thinking about, you want to put in that new high production saw, and it's going to cost $300,000 to put it in, they want to know that they're going to get a return on investment over a certain rate within a certain period of time. Most CFOs, when we talk to them, 15% on an equipment or a capital expenditure is usually a good ROI to get them over their hurdle rate. So at the point where you overcome that 15%, it's off to the races. They'll give you authorization to go ahead and spend the money. You like that little animation there? Our marketer spent 16 hours on that. No, just kidding. So when we have that potential ROI, now what we can show them is with our example, in a range, they're going to get a 94 to 205% ROI within that whatever period of time that is. And then remember, it compounds year over year, especially with culture initiatives. When you put in a culture initiative and you get an ROI, if it's locked in, that culture returns on those savings every year. Your savings continue to increase, your percentage ROI goes up exponentially, and there's no other place that you can invest and get a return like there is on your culture. So really important what you're seeing here, some of the savings numbers based on the example we ran today. So wrapping all of this up, we just want you to be thinking about communicating effectively with your management team some of the different ways that we've shown you here in this avoidance of loss model, understanding some of the drivers of your costs. Wherever you can leverage a proven ROI, it now becomes management's choice as to whether they want to pay now or pay later, right? Invest the money up front or spend the money later on massive costs. So really a good way to look at things. And we've been doing this for a long time. Optimum's celebrating its 17th anniversary today, and we've been helping organizations all over the US and Canada find return on investment as it relates to safety for years. Believe me, there are proven cases over and over again. I want to present one last thing before we go to Q&A. MSCI has partnered with Optimum to produce a lot of different resources for the industry. They're industry specific for metals. They're all at the msci.org website on the safety page. You can find a plethora of different information there, as well as our safety helpline resources. Please do take advantage of that, reach out. We can have a conversation. There's never a charge. We're just thankful to be able to help the industry. We want to help you through these initiatives and see people valued and safe in their workplace. So with that, Brianna, I'm going to go ahead and take a drink and turn this back over to you for our Q&A.
Hi, Steve. Thank you so much. So much insight, lots of information there. Hopefully everyone takes the time after this to digest it all and look over it again, and then do take advantage of contacting Steve and asking any questions that they might have. But we do, let's see, it looks like we have time. We have a few questions coming in. Let's see. Have you ever had any cases where management still wouldn't move forward, even with monetary savings? And what did you do?
It's a great question. Yeah, I kind of alluded to that when I said management will always move forward with a monetary savings, right? On one of our slides earlier. management will most always move on. I have had an example in my career of working inside a plant where we had a really bad piece of conveying equipment. It was conveying concrete slurry upward into a bucket from a mixer. And, it happened to be concrete. You've got examples that are similar in your industry. It could be shot for a shot blasting machine. It could be slugs for a scrap conveyor. Whatever it was, we had an employee that had to stand there and shovel concrete back onto the belt all day long from it dropping on the floor. And even though the machine was extremely expensive to maintain, had a lot of downtime, wasn't very reliable, cost us a lot of production days, and also was injuring this employee. We had a couple of back claims and had to change that. It had a rotation of employees in that area. The solution I put in place would have had an ROI in the several 100% within about a 6 to 8 month period, and the management team would not move forward on it. What I didn't realize at the time, I didn't have full view of all of the items on their radar screen. There was a cash constraint that they had. They couldn't invest the money. They were in a position where they were trying to push off every expense. Just happened to be the climate of the business at that time. And no matter how good the example was, they just weren't able to invest in it. So oftentimes there are factors outside your control. Do the best you can, present it, and understand that sometimes there are things above our pay grade, right, that we can't see. No matter how we push, we want to be careful we don't become the very squeaky wheel that's just screaming at management and they can't actually do anything about it right now. It's a bad position to put ourselves in as well as them. So sometimes we have to trust that the people above us have more on their screen than we do.
Mhm.
So hopefully that's helpful, Brianna.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, so some companies can't bite off an investment amount of $250,000. What kind of reduction of injury might they expect?
That's a great question. Yeah, so the example I used was, 250,000, which for, quite honestly, for some companies on this line would be, not petty cash, but it's not a very significant investment. For others, that might represent their entire profit and loss for the year. So it really just depends on the organization. For those smaller organizations, you're going to have less people. You're typically going to have less equipment, and therefore your capital expenditures will be lower as well. So scale has a lot to do with it. And there are a lot of projects you can undertake that will not require significant capital investment that can have a significant return. So it's getting a little bit of advice on the specific example that you're in. I will tell you that for most organizations, an initiative around things like near-miss reporting can be very inexpensive and can yield tremendous results. As long as you're taking that near-miss reporting and then actually doing something with it, doing an investigation, finding the cause, and then remediating that cause, getting rid of the exposure to the worker. Once the workers understand that you're taking that input and you're doing something productive with it, they'll give you more and more of it. And that can be a very inexpensive initiative to drive a lot of change.
Mhm. I think that kind of helps with our next question, and one that we see quite often is, with everyone being on different point of their safety journeys and then also being able to spend different amount of money, is what is a good project that to get started in for management's buy-in?
Yeah, so you got to do it right, but there's a lot to it. There's some nuances to it, but near-miss reporting is one of them. And then the other thing is to analyze your losses. Take a look at your work comp injury logs or your OSHA record keeping logs, your injury data, and look for high dollar value claims and high frequency claims. So a lot of times within our industry, it's hand injuries. Glove initiatives can be really good. We've talked on prior webinars as you know, Brianna, about gloves, push sticks, hands-off devices, hands-free kind of no-touch tools. A lot of different initiatives like that can really yield a big result, getting rid of catastrophic or lagging, kind of, repetitive injuries, right? So those are just some ideas, but it really depends on the organization and, a little bit of an analysis.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep, thank you. And so as Steve mentioned, we did do a hand injury webinar last year. So that is in the webinar resource library. If anybody needs help accessing that, just please do contact us. But I think no other questions look like they're coming in. That concludes us for today. And thank you, Steve, and everyone at Optimum Safety Management for pulling together today's webinar and for joining us.
Absolutely. Brianna,
Have a
thank
great
you
week,
again.
everyone. All right,
Yeah,
be
thank
safe,
you.
everyone.